He pointed his finger and screamed like Marcus had stolen something, right there in front of the whole shop, in front of an old lady just trying to fix her walker. Fired him, no warning, no dignity, just shouted and sent him packing like garbage because Marcus helped someone for free. But the next morning, 7 trucks lined the street, and every single one of them had something to say, not with words, but with engines running, customers missing, and doors staying shut. Let me know where you're watching from. What city are you in? Greenwood. Indiana wasn't the kind of place where people expected trouble. It was a small town where everyone knew the guy who ran the diner, who cut hair on Main Street, who fixed your car when the AC gave out in July. It wasn't flashy, but it worked, and for Marcus Bennett, that was enough. At 27, he wasn't looking to be a big name. He just wanted to do good work, get home in time to help his sister with her nursing school essays, and maybe someday have a little garage of his own. Nothing more. He had hands that knew how to listen. Engines spoke to him in a way people didn't. He'd been at Denton's Auto and Tire for 3 years. Never late, never loud, just the kind of man who brought his own lunch, wiped down his tools every evening, and stayed out of drama. Craig Denton, on the other hand, didn't stay out of anything. Craig owned the shop, wore collared shirts and tucked them in tight, always had a Bluetooth in his ear like he was on Wall Street, not running a garage off Route 52. He barked instead of talked, called customers buddy or darlin', and expected the world to thank him for it. Marcus knew the type. Craig wasn't the worst guy out there, but he never hid what he thought, especially when it came to people who didn't fit into his idea of how things should work. The truth is, Craig didn't trust what he didn't control. It was a Tuesday afternoon, late May, the kind of heat that made wrenches burn your palms and sweat roll into your eyes. Marcus had just finished replacing brake pads on a Chevy Malibu when he noticed her, Ms. Evelyn Ross. Everyone in town called her Miss Evelyn, retired schoolteacher, taught half the town's kids how to read, including Marcus and probably Craig, though he'd never admit it. She moved slow now, with a silver walker and a back that tilted to the left like her whole body was tired of the weight it carried. But she still wore lipstick, still smiled when she spoke, still remembered names like it meant something. She came walking up the driveway, pushing her walker crooked, one wheel stuck and scraping along the pavement. The sound hurt to hear. Marcus dropped the towel in his hand, walked straight toward her. "Hey now, Miss Evelyn, don't you strain yourself like that." "What's going on with the wheel?" he asked, already crouching down. "It's bent again, honey," she said, breath catching. "Got caught in a crack on the sidewalk this morning. I was hoping maybe you had a little wrench back there to straighten it." He didn't hesitate, pushed her walker to the edge of the bay, flipped it over like it was the hood of a car, and pulled out a socket set. It wasn't much. Took him maybe 8 minutes. Replaced the bolt, oiled the axle, adjusted the front joint where the rubber had worn thin. While he worked, she told him about her nephew coming up from Cincinnati this weekend and how her fig tree had finally started blooming again. Marcus smiled as he wiped grease from the frame. "You're good now, Miss Evelyn. This wheel's got another 10 miles in it at least." She touched his arm gently. "You always take care of folks, Marcus. Your mama raised you right." Then came the voice, sharp, cutting through the heat and the sound of drills and engines. "What the hell is this?" Craig's voice bounced off the bay doors. He was standing just outside the office, arms crossed, face red. Marcus looked up, still kneeling. "Just fixing Miss Evelyn's walker. It was stuck." Craig didn't move. "You're not a damn Goodwill volunteer. You think this is why I pay you? For sidewalk charity?" The shop fell quiet. Luis, working on a tire rotation 2 bays down, froze with a wrench in hand. The new kid at the counter stopped typing. Miss Evelyn looked stunned, like she couldn't believe someone was speaking like that with her right there. Marcus stood slowly. "It took 5 minutes. She needed help." Craig stepped forward, raising his voice even more. "I don't care if she needed a new hip. This isn't a church, it's a business. You want to be a mechanic or you want to play social worker?" Miss Evelyn started to speak, but Marcus gently put his hand out to stop her. His voice stayed calm. "I was just trying to help. It's not a big deal," Craig snapped. "It is when it's on my time. You want to do favors. Do 'em on your own clock." The silence after that was heavy. Marcus didn't say anything. He just picked up the walker, handed it back to Miss Evelyn with a quiet, "Here you go," and walked back to his bay. Miss Evelyn, visibly shaken, gripped the handles tighter. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something to Craig, maybe a piece of her mind, maybe something softer, but nothing came out, just a quiet sigh and the scraping of wheels as she turned away. That night, Marcus didn't talk about it, not to his sister, not even to Luis when they crossed paths on the way to the bus. It wasn't the first time someone like Craig pulled that kind of power move. He'd learned not to expect fairness. What mattered was that he did what felt right. Still, something about the way Craig had looked at him, like he was nothing, like helping someone made him weak, sat heavy on Marcus's chest. The next morning, he showed up at 7:55, like always, clocked in, grabbed his gloves. Luis gave him a nod, and before he could even reach the workbench, Craig called him into the office. The door shut behind them. Craig didn't sit, just leaned on the desk, arms crossed again. "I thought about it. This isn't working out," he said. Marcus blinked. "Excuse me? You're not focused. You've been distracted lately. This thing with the old lady yesterday, that was the last straw." Marcus stayed still. "You're firing me for fixing her walker." Craig narrowed his eyes. "No, I'm firing you because I can't run a place where people do whatever they want. You don't get to decide what's worth your time here." "I do." Marcus stared at him for a long second, then just nodded. Once. No argument, no pleading. He just turned, opened the door, and left the same way he came in, quiet. By noon, the news had already hit half the town, and Miss Evelyn was on her way. It wasn't like Evelyn Ross hadn't seen people act out of line before. She'd been a black woman in America for over 70 years, taught in public schools through 3 different administrations, raised 2 kids, buried one, outlived a husband and a brother, and learned long ago how to keep her spine straight when someone tried to bend it. But that moment outside the garage didn't feel like just another disrespectful interaction. It felt heavier. It felt like something that shouldn't go unanswered. She'd walked home slowly that afternoon, listening to the wheels of her fixed walker roll smooth for the first time in weeks. But each turn of those wheels brought with it a growing discomfort, not in her body, but in her chest. That boy had helped her, didn't ask for a thing, didn't even look like he thought twice about it. And he got punished for it like he'd stolen from the register. She couldn't shake the look in his eyes, steady but not cold, just used to being treated like that, used to swallowing it and keeping his head down. Back home, she poured herself some sweet tea, sat in the corner chair by the window and stared out at the street. The same street she'd lived on for almost 50 years. The kids who used to throw footballs near her porch were grown now, some still in town, some gone. But Evelyn never left. She knew everyone here, and she knew what she saw that day wasn't just wrong. It was the kind of wrong that spread if nobody said anything. She reached for her landline and started dialing. Marcus, on the other hand, was still trying to wrap his head around the silence, that strange quiet that follows you after something sudden happens, like your body hasn't caught up to the news. He didn't go home right away, didn't feel like explaining things to his sister yet. She had enough on her plate. Instead, he walked around the block, then sat on a bench near the little park behind the library, just watching kids play and trying to figure out what to do next. He didn't have savings stacked up. Denton's paid okay. Not great, but the benefits helped. He'd been sending money to help his sister cover her books and transport for school. Losing the job meant he had about 3 weeks before everything would start to slide out of control. Still, he didn't feel angry. Not yet. He just felt tired. Tired of how predictable it was. He helped someone because it was the right thing to do, and somehow that got spun into a problem. It wasn't even about the job anymore. It was about how normal it felt to be thrown aside for doing something decent. Luis called that evening, voice low but firm. He said he saw it happen, the whole thing, and that it made him sick. Luis had been at Denton's for 5 years, sent money back to his mom in El Salvador, didn't want trouble, didn't like drama. But this, he said, wasn't something you could ignore. It could have been me, man. Or any of us. Marcus didn't say much, but the call meant something. He wasn't alone in how he felt, even if it looked like it. The next morning, Evelyn showed up at the garage again. But this time she wasn't pushing her walker alone. She was standing beside Sam Martinez, a father of 3, who owned the HVAC company on the north end of town. He'd seen the video Luis quietly recorded, just a minute-long clip where Craig yelled, Marcus stayed calm, and Evelyn stood there humiliated. Sam hadn't said anything yesterday, but today he came with his service truck and parked it right across the street from the garage. Didn't honk, didn't shout, just sat on the hood drinking coffee, watching. A few hours later, another truck pulled up, Lena from the landscaping company. She parked behind Sam, then Ricky from the plumbing company, then Joelle, who ran a mobile pet grooming van. No one made a scene. They just showed up. Craig noticed, of course. From the minute Sam parked, he was watching from the window in his office. At first, he laughed, thought it was a weird coincidence. But by the time the fifth vehicle pulled up, and not one of them came in for service, he realized something was off. Luis didn't say anything. He worked quietly, but his eyes stayed on the street. Dana, Craig's sister, and the one who kept the books, came in late that morning, saw the trucks lined up and went straight to the back without even saying hello. Inside the garage, things felt different. Customers trickled in less and less. Some who came in didn't stay. One man pulled into the lot, made eye contact with Craig through the window, then reversed and left. Craig paced the office, muttering about people overreacting, about how nobody appreciated how hard it was to run a business. Dana finally walked in, holding a manila folder with invoices, and asked flat out, "You sure you want to double down on this?" Craig snapped back that he wasn't going to let the help decide how to run his shop. Meanwhile, Marcus was home printing out resumes. He wasn't on social media, didn't know about the video yet. He thought maybe he could get a spot at the tire place over in Fortville, or maybe the used car lot that did their own maintenance in Anderson. It would mean longer bus rides, maybe even having to get a second job just to keep up with the rent. But he'd do it. He always had. He was raised to survive. But when his sister came home that night, her eyes were wide. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, holding her phone. "This video, everyone's sharing it. You're all over Facebook." Marcus looked confused until she showed him. The clip had already been viewed 10,000 times, with comments pouring in, people angry, people shocked, people offering to help. One guy even wrote, "If this man opens his own garage, I'll be his first customer." Marcus didn't know what to do with that. It felt strange, like people were looking at a part of his life that he never intended to show. He wasn't trying to start a movement. He just helped an old woman fix a walker, but it struck a nerve, and now strangers were offering donations, tools, even free space to work from. Evelyn had done more than make a few calls. She had rallied half the town, not with protests or hashtags, but with conversations, quiet persuasion, and the kind of respect you can only earn by living right for a long time. Dana quit the garage 2 days later. She left a note on Craig's desk and told Luis she couldn't work for someone who treated people like that. "Family doesn't excuse everything," she said. That afternoon, she took a walk with Evelyn, sat on her porch for over an hour, and said it was time to figure out something better. Marcus wasn't ready to open a garage, not yet, but something had shifted. Every day, more trucks parked across the street. No yelling, no signs, just presence, the sound of engines idling like a quiet protest. Craig tried to ignore it, but the shop was losing money fast. His regulars had stopped calling. One of the auto parts reps told him straight up, "We heard what happened, man. Bad look." Craig snapped that people were being dramatic, but even he could see the writing on the wall. Marcus still hadn't spoken to Craig. He didn't want to. There was nothing left to say. But one morning, he got a call from Joelle, the pet groomer. She said she had a spare storage unit next to her van lot. Told him it wasn't much, but if he needed space to work, it was his. Free for a month. He hesitated, then thanked her. That night he went by to check it out. It was small, dusty, but it had a roll-up door and enough space for a workbench and a lift if he could find one. Back home, Marcus stared at the unit keys in his hand. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like a symbol. He just wanted to work with dignity. That was all. But now it seemed like people actually saw him, and they wanted him to rise, not just survive. The next morning, Evelyn was already at the lot when he arrived, sitting on her walker, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other. "We got some calls to return," she said with a smile, and Marcus smiled back. Not because things were easy now, but because, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't carrying it all alone. The first time Marcus turned the key in the lock of that dusty unit Joelle had given him, it didn't feel like the start of anything big. It felt more like standing in front of a blank page, not knowing what to write. The space was barely wide enough for one car, and the floor was covered in a fine layer of dirt and old leaves. There were no tools yet, no lift, no signage, just 4 concrete walls and a metal door that squeaked when it rolled up. But there was something about it, something solid. He didn't have much, but he had that key in his hand, and he had people who saw him, people who showed up for him without asking for anything in return. That was more than he'd ever expected to count on. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt like the world had paused just long enough to let him catch up. Not because it owed him anything, but because he had quietly earned that space. He didn't make an announcement. He didn't post anything online or call in a favor. He just showed up early the next day with his backpack, a pair of gloves, and a broom. Evelyn came with her foldable lawn chair and a notebook already scribbled full of phone numbers. Luis brought over a used jack and a box of tools he said he found in the garage before quitting 2 days earlier. Dana stopped by with some fresh flyers she had printed with her own money. Nothing fancy, just black and white paper with his name, a phone number, and the words Bennett Auto Repair, honest work. Fair prices. She said she'd been sending them around to small businesses already and dropped off a stack at the church. Word spread faster than Marcus could have imagined. Within a few days, he was getting calls, not just from friends or neighbors, but from people he didn't even know. A retired postal worker with a squeaky engine, a young couple whose car battery kept dying at night, a single mom who'd been quoted $500 for something Marcus fixed in 20 minutes with a $10 part. No one questioned his skills. No one asked about credentials. They came because they trusted who he was. And most of all, they trusted the people standing beside him, Evelyn, Luis, Dana, all of them quietly vouching for the kind of man Marcus had always been. But for every customer that came to Marcus, that meant one less going to Denton's. Craig felt it. The silence in his shop grew louder by the day. Where there used to be 3 or 4 cars lined up each morning, now there were sometimes none. The phones didn't ring as often. Walk-ins dried up. Even his parts supplier started taking longer to return his calls. Craig tried blaming the economy at first, then online mechanics, then inflation, but deep down he knew. He knew it had started the minute he opened his mouth to humiliate Marcus over something so small, something so human. What Craig couldn't admit, what he wouldn't allow himself to say out loud, was that the shop wasn't failing because of the walker or the argument. It was failing because for the first time, people saw who he really was when no one filtered it. And now they had a choice. Craig tried to fight back. He went around telling people Marcus didn't have a license, that he was running an illegal business, that it was dangerous to leave your car with someone who didn't have a real shop. He even filed a noise complaint with the city, saying there were too many vehicles parked outside the unit. The inspector came by, took one look around, and said Marcus wasn't doing anything wrong. Everything was up to code, and the complaints didn't add up. Evelyn was there when the man left and said Craig must be real desperate if he was trying that hard to shut down kindness. But even with all the support, it wasn't easy. Marcus worked long hours, longer than he ever did at Denton's. He didn't have a team. Luis helped when he could, but he had taken a job doing night shifts at the parts warehouse to cover his rent while helping Marcus build up business during the day. There were nights when Marcus barely got any sleep, when his hands cramped from turning wrenches all day, when the weight of everyone's expectations sat heavy on his shoulders. People believed in him, but that also meant he couldn't afford to fail. He worried about breaking someone's trust more than breaking a bolt, and there were quiet moments, late at night, when the fear crept in that maybe all of this was too good to last. His sister noticed it too. She'd come home and find him passed out on the couch, covered in oil, his dinner untouched. She told him she was proud of him, but she also reminded him he didn't have to carry everything alone. One night, she came and sat next to him and said, "You're building something better." but that doesn't mean it has to destroy you in the process. He nodded, but didn't respond. Part of him still believed he had to prove he was worthy of all this support, that he had to earn it every single day, or it would disappear. Then came the day that changed everything again, and not in a big, dramatic explosion, but in a quiet, simple conversation. A woman pulled up in a beat-up station wagon. She was middle-aged, looked exhausted, and had 2 kids in the back seat. Her name was Renee. She said her brakes had been grinding for weeks, but she didn't have the money to fix them. Marcus looked over the car and told her the pads were almost gone. It wasn't safe to keep driving it like that. She nodded, eyes heavy, and said she understood. She'd have to figure something out, maybe next month. As she turned to leave, Marcus paused. "Wait," he said. "You got time now. I got the parts in back." She looked confused. "But I can't pay yet." He shook his head. "You can bring me what you can when you can. Or not at all. You've got kids in that car. They need you to be safe." She just stared at him for a second, then nodded slowly, her eyes shining. She didn't say thank you with words. She said it with the way her shoulders dropped and her breath steadied. He fixed her brakes in less than an hour. She left a $5 bill on the bench near the door before she left, folded into a napkin. That moment traveled. She told her cousin, who told a friend, and soon people weren't just coming to Marcus because he was the guy who got fired unfairly. They were coming because he made them feel human again, because he saw them not as problems, not as invoices, but as people doing their best. Evelyn watched all of it like a proud grandmother who didn't need the spotlight. She kept track of appointments in her notebook, greeted customers with warm smiles, and made sure Marcus drank enough water in the heat. Luis began staying later. Dana started helping with scheduling and paperwork. Bit by bit, they built something that didn't feel like a business. It felt like a home, a place where people were treated right because that's just how things should be. Meanwhile, Craig sat in his half-empty office, surrounded by silence. He didn't talk much anymore. He didn't bark orders or flash that smug grin. He just sat with his numbers and his shrinking bank account. Knowing every empty bay was a reminder that power doesn't mean respect, and once respect is gone, there's not much left to hold on to. Marcus didn't feel triumphant. He didn't brag or gloat or even talk about Craig much. He just kept working. That was his answer to everything: to show up, to keep fixing, to keep proving that kindness wasn't weakness, it was strength. Quiet, steady, undeniable strength. And somehow, through all of it, people began to believe that maybe things could be better, not because someone came in shouting or tearing things down, but because one man decided to do the right thing even when no one was watching. It was about 2 months after Marcus had first opened the unit when people started calling it a shop. It wasn't official, not yet. There was no big sign out front, no business registration filed, no glossy website or Yelp page. But to the people in Greenwood, it had already become the place they trusted. Folks didn't care about all the paperwork. They cared about knowing someone would look them in the eye, tell them the truth, and not take advantage of the fact that they didn't know what a serpentine belt was or how long a starter motor should last. Word had spread beyond the neighborhood. A man drove in from Shelbyville with his wife's car, said he'd heard about Marcus through a friend of a friend who couldn't stop talking about how that guy fixed my AC and wouldn't even take full price when he saw I had a kid in the car seat. And it kept happening. People arriving with stories before they even opened their hoods. Evelyn kept a steady rhythm to it all. She took appointments over the phone, and when people walked in without calling, she found a way to squeeze them in or gently schedule them for the next day. Marcus didn't turn anyone away unless he absolutely had to. Even when he was exhausted, even when his back was aching, even when he was behind on 3 jobs, he made time. There was a quiet pressure building behind his eyes, but he didn't talk about it. The more people came, the more he felt he owed them something. Not just service, but proof that he was worth what they were investing in him, not with money, but with their trust. And somewhere in the middle of all the long days and tools piling up in the back and parts being ordered off of borrowed accounts, Marcus started forgetting what rest felt like. Luis noticed it first. He'd walk in and find Marcus already under a car before the sun had fully risen, running on coffee and maybe 4 hours of sleep. When Luis offered to take over a repair or handle a customer alone, Marcus would just shake his head and say, "I got it." He never snapped, never lost his cool, but there was something in his tone that made it clear. He wasn't just working, he was carrying everyone's expectations, carrying his past, carrying every doubt that Craig's voice had ever planted in his head. Dana watched it happen too. She'd sit on an upside-down crate with a tablet in her lap, updating invoices and sorting through text messages from customers who wanted to drop off their vehicles late. She tried to get Marcus to slow down, told him she could manage more of the scheduling, that Luis could be trained to take diagnostics calls, that Evelyn didn't mind covering more of the front desk. But Marcus would just give that same nod, say thanks, and then keep going. There was a quiet resistance in him, a deep belief that if he let anyone else carry the load, even for a second, the whole thing might collapse. Because this garage, this unlikely little sanctuary, was the first thing in his life that was his. And while Marcus worked himself into a quiet spiral, Craig sat behind the same old desk at Denton's, staring at numbers that didn't make sense anymore. His shop was barely breaking even now. A few loyal customers still came, mostly people who didn't know what had happened or didn't care, but the walk-ins had dried up. The online reviews, which used to be filled with quick praises about oil change speed or friendly service, had been replaced by long posts from customers who said they'd never return. Some mentioned the video. Others just said it didn't feel right there anymore. Craig tried to make excuses, to himself mostly. He said people were overreacting, that they didn't understand what it took to run a business, that Marcus had no clue how hard it was to pay taxes, insurance, rent, that helping some old lady for 5 minutes wasn't enough to make you a hero. But the truth weighed on him. In the quiet moments, he replayed that afternoon over and over. The way Marcus had looked at him, not angry, not scared, just steady, like nothing Craig said could touch who he was. That was what had unsettled Craig most. That look, that calm refusal to break under pressure, because Craig had spent years getting used to people flinching when he raised his voice, backing down when he pointed his finger. But Marcus didn't, and now every empty bay in his garage felt like a consequence he didn't see coming. One afternoon, Craig tried something bold. He walked across the street and stood just outside Marcus's shop. It wasn't a confrontation. He didn't storm in or demand anything. He just watched. Marcus was under a car with Luis beside him, and Evelyn was sipping lemonade in the shade, humming softly while Dana typed away. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but there was life there, real life. Customers laughed, kids played with chalk near the sidewalk, and music drifted from a small speaker in the corner. Craig didn't step forward. He didn't say anything. He just turned around after a few minutes and walked back to his shop, a strange, hollow feeling sitting in his chest. Later that week, Marcus finally hit a wall. It was a Thursday, and the heat had reached 95 before noon. He'd taken in 2 extra cars without telling anyone, just trying to help people out who couldn't wait. Luis told him he needed to rest, but Marcus just kept working. Then, sometime around 6 p.m., his hands went numb. He dropped a wrench, leaned against the lift, and for a few seconds everything went dark. When he opened his eyes, Evelyn was holding his arm, her voice trembling, saying his name. Dana had already called for help. He hadn't passed out completely, but it was close. They forced him to sit down, and for the first time, Marcus didn't argue. He sat on the old stool in the back, sweat dripping down his face, his heart racing not from fear, but from the sudden realization that he wasn't invincible. Luis handed him water. Dana pulled out her phone to look for a clinic. Evelyn just sat beside him, quiet, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. That night, after they closed early and got him checked out, it was dehydration and exhaustion, nothing more serious. Marcus went home and didn't say much. He sat on the edge of the bathtub with the shower running, not even stepping in, just listening to the sound of water and thinking about how close he'd come to burning himself out completely. It wasn't just the work, it was the weight, the pressure to never stop, to never slip, to keep earning what people had already told him he deserved. Somewhere deep down, he still didn't believe it was real. He thought if he slowed down, people would see him as unworthy again. The next morning, Evelyn called early, not to ask if he was feeling better, but to tell him she'd made a schedule. "You're off today," she said, like a teacher who wasn't going to debate it. Dana backed her up. Luis was already covering the garage with two other volunteers from the neighborhood who had some mechanical experience. Marcus tried to argue, but no one was listening, so he stayed home, sat in the living room, watched the light shift across the wall for an hour, and realized he hadn't done that in years. When he finally walked back into the shop the next day, nothing had fallen apart. In fact, things had gone smoothly. Luis had handled the jobs. Dana had kept the books. Evelyn had even turned away a pushy customer who insisted on skipping the line. Marcus looked around and saw something he hadn't noticed before, not just a shop, but a team, a real one. People who weren't just helping him build something, they were building it with him. And in that moment, he understood something that hadn't clicked until now. This wasn't about proving he was worth something. He didn't have to chase that anymore. It was about building something bigger than himself. Something that could last, something that could carry others the way they had carried him. The week Marcus finally got his official license to operate as a registered mechanic in Marion County, the paper came in a plain envelope. Nothing fancy. No embossed stamp, no gold seal, just a folded letter and a printed certificate that said, authorized to conduct automotive repairs in the state of Indiana. He held it in his hands a long time, sitting in the same folding chair outside the shop that Evelyn always claimed for herself. The sun had just started to dip, casting a deep orange across the street, and the hum of nearby traffic faded in and out like background noise. Marcus didn't say much. He just looked at the paper, not like it was a prize, but like it was proof. Proof that the hours, the pressure, the doubt, the burnout, the starting from nothing had meant something. Not to strangers or inspectors or banks, but to himself. By now, the unit was more than just a makeshift garage. Luis had built shelving for parts and tools along the walls. Dana had added a proper desk and a small waiting area with two worn chairs, and Evelyn had turned the corner by the front door into a sort of welcome station, where she kept a notebook of everyone who came through and a jar of mints that customers always commented on. Business was steady, not overwhelming, but real. Marcus worked with structure now. He took days off. He let Luis handle full jobs without watching over his shoulder. He even started training a high schooler from the neighborhood, Kevin, who reminded him a little too much of himself at 17. Quiet, unsure, but already good with his hands. Marcus saw that, and he knew how important it was to be seen before you even believed in yourself. Then, out of nowhere, Craig showed up. It was a Friday afternoon, slow and quiet. Evelyn wasn't there for once. She'd gone to a dentist appointment, and Dana was on a call inside. Marcus was under the hood of a van when he heard the voice. Not loud, not angry, just there. "Hey!" Marcus looked up, eyes adjusting to the sunlight. Craig stood at the edge of the lot in jeans and a polo. No clipboard, no Bluetooth headset. Just a man who looked older than he had the last time they'd seen each other. More tired, less certain. "I need some help with my truck," Craig said, like the words weighed more than he expected them to. Marcus didn't move right away. He wiped his hands on a rag, closed the hood of the van gently, and stepped out from under the lift. He looked at Craig like he was trying to figure out whether this was a joke, a trap, or something else entirely, but there was no smirk, no arrogance, just a man holding onto the keys of a pickup that hadn't seen a wash in months. "I've been to 2 other shops. Nobody wants to touch it," Craig said, shrugging a little. "Figured I'd ask." Marcus didn't say anything. He looked over at the truck, then back at Craig. "You can wait like everybody else," Marcus said simply, and turned back to his work. Craig nodded once. He didn't argue, didn't ask for special treatment. He walked over, took a seat on the sidewalk, and waited. Not like a man with options, like someone who'd finally run out of them. Dana came out a few minutes later, saw him, and froze. She gave Marcus a look, and he just shook his head like it wasn't worth a conversation. Luis walked past, caught sight of Craig, and let out a single dry laugh before going back to work. No one said anything cruel. No one threw him out. They just let him sit there, like any other customer. 2 hours passed before Marcus finally got to the truck. It was an older Dodge, engine misfiring, battery corroded, belts nearly gone. He did a full check and came back with a list. Nothing dramatic, just basic neglect. "You can fix it?" Craig asked. "I can," Marcus said. "Might take a few days. Need to order parts." Craig pulled out his wallet, but Marcus stopped him. "You'll get an invoice, same as everyone else. no favors. Craig looked down. Wasn't asking for one. They didn't say much else. Craig left the truck, walked off down the street without asking for a ride. He didn't come back the next day or the day after. When the parts arrived, Marcus fixed the truck and left it in the corner spot by the fence. A week later, Craig returned with the payment in full, handed it to Evelyn, who had come back that morning and didn't hide her surprise. "Didn't think I'd see you here again," she said. Craig gave a small, dry smile. "Didn't think I'd have to come." He turned to Marcus as he walked out. "Thank you." Marcus didn't answer, just nodded once and went back to work. That moment became a kind of full circle, quiet, unresolved in the traditional way, but honest. Marcus didn't need an apology anymore. He didn't need recognition. He had his shop, his people, his peace. That was enough. Weeks passed, then months. Marcus got the permit to expand into the next unit over. With help from Luis, they installed a second lift. Dana started offering bookkeeping services to other local businesses and used the garage as her base of operations. Evelyn kept showing up with her notebook and her mints, though she said one day soon she'd slow down. When Marcus asked what she'd do with her time, she smiled and said, "Sit in the sun and finally finish that mystery novel I started 20 years ago." One Saturday morning, a customer asked if the shop had a name. Marcus paused for a second, then said, "It's just Bennett Auto." The customer nodded. "Has a good ring to it." Later that evening, Evelyn pulled him aside. "You know, Marcus, you didn't just open a garage. You opened something people didn't know they needed." He looked at her, puzzled. "A place where people get treated like they matter." And he understood then that this story, the one people had whispered about and posted online and retold over dinners and phone calls, wasn't really about the firing or the walker or even the comeback. It was about how decency, when done without noise or reward, ripples wider than anyone expects. It was about showing up for someone, even when it cost you something, and how that small act of humanity can expose everything that's broken in the world and everything worth fixing. Marcus didn't win by proving Craig wrong. He won by staying himself, by choosing not to harden when things turned unfair, by fixing what he could, one bolt, one brake line, one engine at a time. And that became his legacy, not one written in headlines or bank accounts, but in the quiet way people walked away from his shop feeling like they'd been treated right. If that story meant something to you, leave a comment with the word trucks, because that's what Marcus protected in himself and in everyone who crossed his path. There is a story here on the screen that will also move you. Press play, you won't regret it.